Hey folks! Tonight we're diving into the weird, ambitious, and occasionally eyebrow-raising world of medieval beauty standards, a place where looking healthy was out, and looking like you just did a light jog was in. So before you get comfy, smash that like button and subscribe, but only if you really dig what I'm putting down here. Oh, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Always fun to see who's tuning in from around the globe. Now, lights off, fan on, to create that gentle buzzing white noise vibe. And let's start tonight's journey. Back in medieval times, ghost white skin wasn't a sign you needed more sleep. Nope, it was a fashion statement, a subtle way of flexing your social status, basically screaming, "I'm so rich I never have to see the sun. Thanks very much." Unlike today, where glowing skin means yoga, smoothies, or beach days. Medieval beauty was the exact opposite. If you were tanned, that meant you worked outside, and working outside, that meant you were poor, and poor meant oh no manual labor. Nothing screamed not pretty in the 14th century more than knowing how to milk a cow. So the whiter your skin, the higher your status, and when I say white, I don't mean a soft ivory glow. I mean porcelain so pale your veins popped out, like you just got scared by a ghost. Or maybe you were the ghost, of course. Nature wasn't always cooperative, especially if you were born with a normal circulation system. So help was needed. Noble women, and sometimes men too, would slap on white lead powder. It gave that signature deathly pale look and, as a bonus, slowly poisoned you. But hey, beauty always comes with a price. Some folks used vinegar-soaked cloths to bleach their skin. Others mixed crushed pearls with egg whites not just to brighten up, but to make your cheeks feel like expired scrambled eggs. Some even drew blue veins on their hands and chest with colored powder to fake fragility. Because nothing screams noble like pretending your skin's about to crack open. Even literature wasn't safe from this trend. Love poems described women as white as milk, white as snow, and once, white as a winter moon, in other words, looking like they were about to pass out. Fabulous. That ghostly pale beauty wasn't just about looks. It summed up class, purity, and total detachment from farming. If you had the cash to look frail, you'd already won the game. Medieval beauty often demanded commitment, and by commitment, I mean a slow chemical warfare decorating your own face, because for those craving that perfect pale skin, nature just wasn't cutting it. So they turned to makeup, specifically white lead powder. Yep, lead. The stuff we now quarantine in old buildings. But back then, it was considered cutting-edge tech. The result, a smooth, flat, ghostly white finished the medieval version of full coverage foundation. It made skin look flawless, and the feeling absolutely not. White lead powder was made by mixing vinegar and metal, creating a corrosive white crust that could be ground into fine powder. Slap this on daily, and voila, you looked like a delicate noble glowing with a secret death wish. And if your skin started peeling, blistering, or flaking off in diplomatic negotiations, or patches that was even better, it meant the makeup was working. This probably wasn't a one-product gig. Many used red mercury lipstick for color or white powder to make it last longer. Egg whites were brushed on for a smooth shine. In short, if it came from a barn or a doctor's chemical shelf, someone probably painted it on to show off their class. The downside, besides slow poisoning, was that lead products caused everything from chronic fatigue and skin ulcers to hair loss and early death, a detail most modern cosmetics don't mention. But the trend stuck. because if you had to choose between dying slowly or being mistaken for a peasant, nobles usually went for the slow and steady trip to the grave. Men weren't exactly off the hook either. Some male officials also used powder or skin care, especially in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, where image was almost as important as lineage, or at least as important as not smelling worse than your enemy. Of all medieval beauty trends, the obsession with a high forehead probably makes you furrow your brow the most literally, because people actually plucked off their eyebrows to get it. A tall, smooth, uninterrupted forehead wasn't just trendy, it was seen as elegant, smart, and divine. It was the architectural marvel of the medieval face, the ideal forehead said. I spend my days reading psalms and gazing thoughtfully out castle windows. Not, I own a shovel. To pull off this noble look, women had to endure some extreme and seriously itchy measures. Eyebrows were completely plucked off, and even scalp hair was pulled out bit by bit to push the hairline back. This wasn't a haircut, it was a full-on forehead expansion project. Medieval personal care manuals recommended women use tweezers, hot cloths, and hair removal potions made from stuff like cat poop, quicklime, or leeches soaked in vinegar, all just to show off a forehead that could double as a sundial. The results impressive, to say the least. Portraits from back then show women with calm faces and foreheads so wide you could probably stage a sword fight on them. Pair that with ghostly pale skin and soft features, and bam, you've got the high forehead as the ultimate classy beauty symbol. But it wasn't just about the face. Fashion played its part too. Tight-fitting caps, neck scarves, and those famous cone-shaped hennin hats, all designed to pull the hairline up, or at least hide where the eyebrows used to live. And no, this wasn't just some random castle fad. From England to France to Italy, high foreheads were all the rage among the ladies, while artists and poets swooned over women whose faces basically started near the top of their heads. Of course, not everyone had the time or tools to pluck their eyebrows perfectly, so, in a medieval moment of genius, some women faked it by drawing their foreheads higher and covering the rest with headbands or veils. Yep, medieval contouring was a thing, just with way more fabric involved. Back in Europe, eyebrows weren't just ignored, they were straight up erased. Modern trends might celebrate thick, swoopy eyebrows and TikTok tutorials, but in the 14th and 15th centuries, eyebrows were basically unwanted facial junk. To hit the mark, women plucked them almost completely, or bleached them away, or because a smooth, bald forehead was the height of elegance, and any stray hair ruined the whole look. Eyebrows were like stubborn weeds in the garden of your face. Some folks even shaved the entire brow area clean, making sure not a single hair dared wreck that jade-like high forehead vibe. That's dedication that would make today's beauty influencers raise an eyebrow, especially since there were no eyebrow pencils to fill in the gaps back then. To get rid of eyebrows, medieval women used tweezers, wax, pumice stones, or if they were feeling particularly brave, mixtures with quicklime, vinegar, or even arsenic. Yep, arsenic. Because nothing says I'm serious about my looks like risking a little facial bleeding. And this wasn't just some passing trend. Medieval art, from illuminated manuscripts to oil paintings, confirms this eyebrow extinction event. Ladies were often painted with smooth foreheads and vacant stares, surrounded only by pale, flawless skin. The result, sometimes serene, sometimes alien, depends on the lighting. Really, interestingly, the trend wasn't uniform everywhere. In some parts of Europe, Thin or slightly curved eyebrows stuck around, especially where Middle Eastern and Byzantine influences crept in through trade and war. But overall, the message was loud and clear: if people can see your eyebrows, you messed up. And this eyebrow massacre wasn't just for women. Men, especially court insiders, sometimes groomed their brows to look refined, though fully plucking them was rare, unless they'd lost their eyebrows in a heated theological debate or something. All this shows medieval beauty standards weren't natural, they were crafted, symbolic, and a bit angelic. After all, angels in art rarely have eyebrows. Coincidence, maybe. But hey, it worked for them in the Middle Ages. A little pink on the cheeks was a good thing. But like everything back then, it came with rules, social risks, and the chance of being cursed. The standard was a light blush, like you just heard a mildly scandalous poem or stepped outside for 30 seconds, but not long enough to burn. Sunburn, big no-no. That rosy glow meant youth, fertility, and survival, all considered attractive, especially if you managed to keep it past 28. But looking like you're trying too hard forbidden. Wearing blush was seen as vain, and vanity was close to sin. The church frowned on women painting their faces unless they were nobles, or did it modestly, something scholars are still scratching their heads about in theological gray areas. Still, women got creative. Common blush ingredients included beet juice, mashed strawberries, mulberries, or even cochineal, a deep red pigment made from crushed bugs. Yep, bugs. Because beauty has never been easy. Some rubbed their cheeks for a natural flush. Others used red earth or wine dregs, carefully applying it to avoid suspicious eyes of priests or nosy neighbors. The rich used red lead or cinnabar, both deadly poisonous. But the motto was, I might die young, but I'll die with rosy cheeks and society's respect. Blush was applied with cloth, fingers, or whatever wasn't used in the kitchen. Mirrors were rare. So many relied on feel, muscle memory, or an honest maid. Of course, if your blush was too obvious, you risked being mistaken for a prostitute or, worse, a French aristocrat. Yikes. The goal was subtle enhancement, not theatrical performance, and if someone complimented your glow, you were expected to deny it like a pro and mumble something about the wind. Even nuns sometimes wore a discreet touch of blush. Only on big feast days, because nothing says I serve God like a hint of beet juice behind the convent curtain in medieval Europe. If your hair didn't look like it had just been kissed by holy light or dipped in fairy dust, you were losing points. Blonde hair, especially, was the gold standard back then. It came with youth, beauty, virtue, and if you need a bit of divine help, Mary's usually painted with golden hair, even though geography says otherwise. But who cares about geography when you can glow like a saint-born blonde? Congrats, you're basically blessed and might get off some chores. Natural blondes don't last, though especially when you grow up. So medieval ladies got creative, whipping up DIY bleach mixes with saffron, chamomile, ashes, honey, and alkaline soap. They slathered that stuff on and sunbathed like it was the medieval version of a tanning salon. Best results if you're patient as a nun and skin tough as a lizard's. Some recipes even included pee, urine, because people believed it brightened hair color. Whose pee? No rule book on that. As long as your hair shines with a holy glow, it's all good. Such beauty always comes with a bit of a horror show. Hair texture mattered too long. Wavy locks hanging like a divine curtain or the real deal. But that privilege was strictly for unmarried ladies. Once you said, "I do," your shiny blonde hair had to hide under veils, hairnets, and scarves because apparently, the moment you said yes, your hair became a national security threat. Noble ladies went all out with braids, twists, and elaborate buns, especially for court or church events. Their hairstyles were sprinkled with silk ribbons, beads, and embroidery just to remind everyone they weren't sheep shearers. And what about the guys they weren't left behind, though less scrutinized? Golden locks on men were glorified in poetry and art like medieval shampoo ads. Knights with flowing hair charging into battle. That was medieval shampoo commercial 101. In Europe back then, hair was like cash. You didn't flaunt it unless you wanted to snag a husband. Then hair became strategic property. Unmarried women were encouraged to wear their hair long and loose, symbolizing purity and innocence, just not too messy. Unless you wanted to be a forest fairy, a look only saints or martyrs could get away with. Otherwise, a neat braid did the trick. But once married, your hair was banned from public view immediately. Congrats. You now have a husband, and a life mission wrap that hair tighter than the monastery's wine budget. Welcome to the world of headscarves, neck kerchiefs, hairnets, and hairpins, a medieval modesty wardrobe that could turn a blazing blonde beauty into a ghost under 3 layers of beige linen. These outfits weren't just about modesty, they were practical. They shielded hair from smoke, lice, and unwanted compliments from wandering minstrels. The most obedient ladies even layered up, a snug little cap under the headscarf, pinned under a neck kerchief tied tight under the chin. Result, you looked like a devout sandwich, wrapped up tight, and that was the point. But fashion rarely stops at function. Over time, these caps got more elaborate, hairnets embroidered with gold thread, headscarves starched stiff into geometric shapes. Some ladies even wore silk cages around their braids, decked out with gems and tiny bells, because nothing says subtle elegance like jingling every time you turn your head. In many cultures, hidden hair was the moral standard. Covered heads symbolized humility and virtue. But a married woman's loose hair that could get you labeled a trollop or worse. A French woman, of course. Some rebellious ladies pushed boundaries. They let a few strands loose or wore thin. See-through scarves technically still covered, but showing off carefully dyed locks to the world. Medieval loopholes lived on. If medieval beauty had one unspoken rule, it was this: the higher you go, the fancier you are. And no, not your leg length. By the 15th century, women all over Europe went wild for fashion that made them taller the hennin hat. You know the one, those pointy, sky-high hats that look like someone obsessed over cathedral spires a bit too much. Hennins weren't just hats, they were social ladders you wore on your head. They could reach up to 2 feet tall or more, especially for French and Burgundian nobles. The taller the hat, the higher your status, and the more doors you knocked into on your way to dinner, the better. Hennins were usually made of fine silk, velvet, or brocade, with wireframes for that dangerously aerodynamic shape, a thin veil often draped from the peak, adding movement and mystery, and also a great way to get tangled in candles. Keeping your hair tucked just right under these hats was an art form. Hair was braided and stuffed into the cap, or sometimes the forehead was even shaved. Yep, forehead real estate again to keep the hennin steady. Comfortable, forget about it. But hennins weren't the only upright obsession. Some ladies rocked heart-shaped escapons that looked like 2 croissants glued to the sides of their heads, or butterfly hennins with veils fanning out like wings. Super dramatic. But try walking in the rain and you're toast. Outside the nobility, most women stuck to veils, linen caps, or small crowns simpler, less hazardous, and less likely to be mistaken for weapons. The church and conservative thinkers, not fans. They warned these flashy hats could cause pride, sin, and maybe even neck pain. Still, pennons, still a hit among the rich folks. Just like most terrible but trendy fashion ideas throughout history, guys didn't rock those towering cones. But they had their own vibe feather hats, fur-lined caps, and pointy shoes sharp enough to stab someone with. In the Middle Ages, the ideal woman wasn't strong, sexy, or muscular. Nope. The goal looked fragile, modest, and maybe just fainted. The perfect figure, slim, soft, and a bit ethereal, like you survive on honey water, royal poetry, and maybe a dash of frailty. Beauty manuals didn't tell women to bulk up or build stamina. The only move you needed, toss your veil flirtatiously. Then look away quickly, maybe even swoon a little, but not the obvious "I'm dying" look. The standard was just weak enough to be too fragile to carry a bucket, but still capable of playing the lute while sitting down. Slim and graceful was linked to nobility because, obviously, if you worked, you'd have broad shoulders, strong arms, and muscles popping out. The aim was a tiny waist, gentle curves, and a face that screamed spiritually exhausted. Dress waists were cinched just under the chest, a proto-empire waistline to elongate the torso and create the illusion of being tall, skinny, and delicate, if that wasn't enough. They'd tie tightly, not quite corsets yet that came later, but those kirtles and surcoats did the job. But hey, being too skinny wasn't great either, back then, especially during famines or plagues. Being too thin meant you were basically dying. A little plumpness, especially in the face or hips, was the sign you were healthy and fertile. Basically, if you looked like you could survive winter and still keep your poetic soul intact, you nailed it. Diet books back then were a mess. They recommended fennel for digestion, rose petals for fresh breath, and wine to keep the cheeks rosy. Protein only if it still had feathers attached. Guys got a bit more leeway: broad shoulders, strong legs, and the ability to wield a sword without face planting. But nobles still preferred a sleek, elegant look, not the bodybuilder type. In the Middle Ages, a woman's eyes were the ultimate secret weapon, the era's version of flirty emojis. Just deeper and with less blinking. Ideal eyes were big, bright, and soulful, like they whispered, "I'm virtuous and a bit melancholic." Imagine eyes that have seen humanity's downfall but are still politely recovering. Poets were obsessed with these eyes. They called them glowing orbs, heavenly dewdrops, or pure loyalty's lake. Well, just not red. Allergic. Or I stayed up all night partying eyes. Light-colored eyes, blue or gray, were a Northern European fave, symbolizing innocence, purity, and pretending you've never seen horrible stuff. In Southern Europe, dark eyes got mad respect too, especially paired with noble bloodlines and killer dowries. Eye makeup was tricky business. No eyeliner back then, just soot, smudge, and faith. Some women dared to dust black powder around their lashes to make their eyes look bigger, risking irritation, blurry vision, or accidentally inventing the world's first smoky eye. But mostly, they relied on nature and good lighting. Want bigger eyes? Stand near a candle, looking virtuous. Keep your gaze on the floor, always, even if you tripped over a cat. You kept it classy. Weirdly, teary eyes were praised. They showed sensitivity, piety, and maybe you just finished a 300-line poem about chastity. No fake tears. But staring into smoke or enduring a little public embarrassment usually did the trick. Eye contact was a delicate dance. Too much stare bolds of flirty or suspiciously French, too little shady or haunted or possessed. The trick, occasionally glance up from under your lashes, like you know the Bible by heart, but aren't showing off. Now, let's talk about something medieval. Love poems rarely mention breath. Specifically, what it smells like. Knights loved praising rosy lips and pearl white teeth, but rarely what happens when those lips open, because dental hygiene back then was a pipe dream, and fresh breath hadn't been invented yet, unless you count. Standing near an herb garden and hoping for the best, clean breath was a dream. A soft, fresh mouth suggested youth, health, and maybe you didn't just eat garlic with eel for breakfast, even if you totally did. Women tried hard, chewing parsley, fennel seeds, cloves, cinnamon, and sometimes twigs, not just for taste, but to avoid mouth funk. Think of it as the pre-mint gum era. It didn't make your teeth sparkle, but at least it was less terrifying to talk to you up close, for those with cash to burn at the apothecary. There were herbal toothpastes and mouthwashes made from sage, vinegar, and frankincense. Use sparingly, though expensive. And opening your mouth wide in public was a bit much. Modern toothbrushing wasn't a thing yet. People wiped teeth with cloth, scrubbed with powder or crushed herbs, or used chew sticks, small twigs with stiff fibers, to clean teeth and keep hands busy while your date read bad poetry. And even if bad breath wasn't, gotta be romantic. But hey, it's not like it's shocking. Everyone's got bad breath. And honestly, there were bigger problems back then, like surviving winter or not getting burned for heresy, for noble ladies. The trick was minimizing discomfort while staying charming. Keep your distance arm's length for chatting, public displays of affection. Barely a peck when in doubt. Just fan yourself and pretend you're deep in thought. Bonus points if you carry a tiny pomander, a little scented ball of herbs to fan yourself with when needed. Nowadays, a dazzling smile can ignite thousands of dating apps. Medieval times, smiling was a gamble, so save it for special occasions like a spice or a rebellious act of the peasants. Why, because dental hygiene was a joke. Teeth mattered, so sure, but mostly for chewing bread, not seducing your crush. Most people's teeth ranged from mess to downright terrifying, especially after 30. So the fewer teeth you showed, the better. Not because folks were lazy, they just had no toothbrushes, floss, or fluoride. Cavities ran wild thanks to all the bread, porridge, and mead. Sugar wasn't a thing in Europe yet, but even basic carbs wrecked teeth. Dentistry was basically demon exercising with pliers. Still, a healthy smile was quietly admired, just no one threw a parade for it. White, straight teeth rare, seen as a sign of youth, wealth, or maybe a miracle, but no one went around bragging like it was a medieval toothpaste ad. Actually, the shy, closed-mouth smile was the real trend. Think maybe I'm pondering a love poem rather than I'm super happy. Okay, some women tried powders made from sage, salt, or crushed coral to clean or whiten teeth. It kind of worked, but also wore teeth down. Yeah, imagine brushing with sand and hoping for the best. Bottom line, teeth were accepted, not flaunted. Medieval art rarely painted big toothy grins. Saints and angels usually kept their lips politely sealed, probably because they knew the risks of flashing their chompers. Guys weren't off the hook either. A knight might win a lady with courage and a chiseled jaw, but no bard ever sang about his teeth shining like ivory. Poets praised eyes, hair, and hands, not breath or teeth. Medieval male beauty standards, pretty specific. You didn't need Greek god muscles, but also couldn't look like you just fell out of a hay wagon. The ideal was somewhere between ready to duel and able to write poems about dueling without actually breaking a sweat. The ideal man was tall, lean, broad-shouldered, and most importantly, possessed that noble, I couldn't care less vibe. Not too muscular that screams laborer, but not floppy either, which says lazy or meat addicted. You want to look like you could sword fight, but only when your assistant's busy. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and a straight nose were all hot. Think more illustrated manuscript prints, less burly country bumpkin. Beards or clean-shaven faces were both cool depending on region and era, but whatever style, it had to look intentional, not like you got lost in the woods for days. Hair usually hit the shoulders and was styled, especially for gentlemen. Curls were in at many courts, especially if your hair was naturally curly, or at least looked like it. Some guys even used curling irons. Yep, actual heated tools or herbal rinses to boost shine and texture, because nothing says I don't do manual labor like sitting for 45 minutes while your lackey styles your hair. Clothes played a huge role in shaping the ideal male silhouette. Padded shoulders, tight waists, and fitted cloaks helped craft that perfect posture. Nobles never complained they glided by with a hint of disdain, and if some lucky dude had muscles, fine as long as you weren't caught using them for work. Fighting in war, totally cool. Hauling barrels, nope. Most importantly, style had to be effortless. You're born noble, so you don't have to try to be attractive. That's enough to make you a magnet medieval, effortless cool. Except instead of gym time, you inherited land and a falcon. In an era when bathing was optional and plumbing was mostly just a Latin dream, managing body odor became an art form, and not the flashy walk through a cloud of Chanel No. 5 kind, more like avoid smells and hunt down good ones. To be fair, people did bathe, just not as often as we'd like, depending on the century, location, and plague outbreaks. So to keep noses and gods happy, medieval men and women armed their sniffer with herbs, perfumes, and scented sachets, starting with the pomander, a tiny hollow metal ball worn on a chain or pinned to clothes, stuffed with potent herbs like cloves, rosemary, cinnamon, sage, and sometimes the mysteriously named rose powder. These weren't just for show, they were mobile stink shields. Think medieval freeze grenade. Nobles also loved scented gloves, handkerchiefs, even combs. Everything was fair game to boost your aroma, including hair, often doused in flower water or perfumed vinegar. At least enough to, better than the smell of sweat and despair. Right, speaking of sweat. Oh yeah, people sweated buckets back then. Medieval clothes were heavy, summers were brutal, and deodorant that wouldn't show up for centuries to save the armpits. The solution, layers and layers of linen to soak up the sweat, washed way more often than the wool or silk outerwear. Some folks even stuffed herbal sachets inside the layers, hoping a little optimism scented with lavender could mask the funk. Baths. Yeah, they existed, especially early and late medieval times. But getting to one was a whole other story. Church. Types hated the idea of communal naked baths, talk about killing the hygiene buzz. So many just went dry bathing, wiping down with a cloth, and spritzing on perfume to pretend they were clean enough. Then there were the overachievers, stuffing flower petals in shoes or tucking herbs into pillowcases to smell like they just stumbled through an enchanted garden. In medieval Europe, beauty wasn't just skin deep, it came with a moral price tag. A harmonious face could be a divine blessing, a social weapon, or a devil's trap. Sometimes all three before breakfast. Beauty was a tightrope walk on the thinnest ethical wire. On one hand, physical beauty, bright skin, balanced features. Pale complexion was seen as a sign of virtue. If you looked good, you were blessed, chosen by God, or at least not a sheep rustler. Poets, preachers, and painters all portrayed beauty as proof of a pure soul. But here's the catch: if you knew you were beautiful, or worse, used it to your advantage, you instantly became a suspect. Pride was a sin. Remember? And caring too much about your looks screamed vanity, seduction, or the worst French character. Medieval sermons warned that a woman's beauty could tempt men into sin. Of course, the woman's fault. Eve set that precedent, and medieval Europe ran with it for 1,000 years. A woman wearing makeup, showing a bit of hair, or batting her eyes at the wrong night could be accused of anything from immorality to witchcraft. Some even believed beauty was an illusion, a witch's disguise, a spell cast to lure the righteous into downfall. Sounds dramatic. But remember, this was a time when bad weather alone could get you burned at the stake. On the flip side, ugly or unlucky folks were sometimes seen as lacking morals or just plain cursed. The idea that your looks reflected your soul wasn't just popular, it was doctrine in some circles. Beauty meant grace, ugliness meant punishment, disease, or divine disappointment. Naturally, this made everything a total mess. You had to be beautiful, but not too much. Shine with virtue, but don't let anyone think you're full of yourself. And above all, never look better than a local noble's wife. That was a one-way ticket to a silent monastery or a conveniently timed illness. In short, medieval beauty standards weren't just about looks, they were a dramatic high-wire act balancing pride, virtue, and whatever lead powder was left in your makeup box. The Persian immortals weren't just elite warriors. They were a living statement, a symbol of imperial power, flawless precision, and stubborn persistence that just wouldn't quit. They appeared during the birth of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC, as Persia transformed from a regional player into a colossal empire. Cyrus understood one big thing: an empire needs a backbone, not just bureaucrats and governors, but an elite force that could flex power, inspire loyalty, and crush rebellions efficiently. Enter the Immortals. The name Immortals wasn't just royal hype, it was a logistical and psychological masterpiece. According to Herodotus, this unit always kept exactly 10,000 men. If someone died, got sick, or injured, they were replaced immediately. The number never dropped. From the outside, they looked unstoppable, unweakening, and above all, immortal. Legend or clever PR, that image stuck, and the name lived on. Immortal didn't mean they never died, just that Persian power was eternal. These guys weren't some random conscripts. To be an immortal, you had to be picked from Persian nobility, or at least from well-established, loyal high-status families. Training started young. Discipline was brutal. Loyalty to the king was non-negotiable. They weren't just fighters. They embodied Achaemenid values order, obedience, and calm under pressure. They also dressed to impress luxurious cloaks, scale armor under their clothes, usually packing spears, bows, short swords, and wicker shields. Their look was as calculated as their tactics. Persian kings didn't just send soldiers to battle, they sent a moving political message wrapped in silk and steel from the plains of Lydia to the deserts of Egypt, wherever the Persian Empire expanded. The immortals followed. They stood behind the king, beside the throne, and in front of the battlefield. If you saw them coming, you weren't just seeing soldiers, you were looking at the empire's relentless heartbeat. The immortals didn't blink. The immortals didn't back down. The immortals endured, and that's what made them terrifying. The arrival of the Persian immortals weren't just named for kicks. This was psychological warfare. These guys didn't sparkle in shiny brass like Greek hoplites. Nope. The immortals looked like ghostly phantoms gliding over the land in fancy dress. Their uniform was royal flair meets military function. They wore brightly embroidered tunics and pants, usually dyed red or purple, the colors of nobles and power. Underneath scale armor made of bronze or iron, flexible enough to move but deadly up close. Their shields were woven from wicker, light, but arrow-proof and tough enough to take hits. The real showstopper. Their headwear, a soft felt cap called a tiara, sometimes pulled down to hide their faces, unlike the Greeks, who loved showing off their personality through armor and bravery. The immortals screamed uniformity. 10,000 silent soldiers, all decked out the same, creating a sensory overload, like watching a deadly curtain drop on the battlefield. Each immortal carried a short spear, a bow with a quiver of arrows, and a short sword or belt knife. But what really blew minds was their speed and deadly skill across almost any terrain. They trained for agility and endurance, not brute muscle. These guys could march across provinces without breaking formation, and unlike many ancient troops, the immortals were just as comfy fighting on the field as they were guarding the royal court. Their gear was light enough for quick moves, but tough enough to scare and kill. Not raw power, consistency, never failing, never stumbling, never showing a weak spot. And that very consistency, mixed with their mysterious look, made them legendary. When they marched into battle, drums pounded and dust clouded behind them. But their faces stayed chillingly calm. No shouting, no bragging, just eerie, synchronized precision, like they weren't human, but machines made not of flesh, but pure discipline, ritual, and fear. Facing the immortals wasn't just facing death. It was facing an idea that some armies don't just fight against. They endure without rest or mercy. Becoming an immortal wasn't just a job. It was a lifelong identity, a status symbol, and somehow a sentence. Sure, they were respected and well paid, but expectations massive. These guys lived under constant watch. Food, clothes, shelter, all state issued, not out of kindness but total control. Once you joined, you stopped belonging to your family and belonged to the empire. Most immortals came from Persian, Median, or Elamite nobility, but even lower-ranked sons of loyal families could rise if they nailed discipline. Training started young, often in royal court military units. Boys learned horseback archery, how to endure pain and hunger, marching in step, and most importantly, obeying orders without hesitation. No room for glory chasers or personal ambition. Any immortal who stood out too much got adjusted. Formation was sacred, unity above all. Discipline ruled every inch of their lives. Strict daily schedules up before dawn, silent training, weapon and armor maintenance. Meals were communal, always simple. Nutrition calculated for endurance, meat, flatbread, dates, and wine were staples. Luxury, forget it. The empire wanted warriors, not pampered nobles. When not on campaign, the immortals guarded the king and court, but even then, their job wasn't just for show. They watched for assassination plots, spied on treacherous nobles, and kept order in the empire's most chaotic spots. Just their presence has silenced dissent in the royal palace. They were the eyes and ears of the Achaemenid king, trained to detect lies, sense fear, and act decisively. Interestingly, they weren't totally cut off from family life. Immortals could marry and keep families, but when duty called, they dropped everything, no questions asked. Hesitation meant silent replacement. The number had to stay at $10,000. No less, no delays. This cold system guaranteed their legend. They didn't just fight with discipline, they lived it. They were the Empire's tools, honed, polished, and sharpened until only duty remained. If Cyrus the Great created the immortals, Darius the Great perfected them. When Darius took power in 522 BC, amid palace intrigue and assassination, the immortals were his tool to legitimize and stabilize his reign. They weren't just personal bodyguards anymore. They became an extension of royal power, woven directly into the expanding imperial bureaucracy. Darius knew power wasn't just brute force, but the illusion of order and inevitability, and nothing screamed that better than the immortals. He paraded them at festivals, placed them prominently around the new capital Persepolis, and gave them important missions, always present, always calm, always the 10,000 immortal faces of Persian dominance. But Darius also shifted their tactical role. Under his command, the immortals became the secret sauce in Persia's coordinated weapon warfare. They weren't just elite foot soldiers anymore. They rolled out alongside archers, cavalry, and chariots in slick combo attacks. Darius valued strategic flexibility big time, so the immortals had to step up their game. They trained harder for ranged combat, siege warfare, and battlefield teamwork. Greek eyewitnesses later described them moving like a scary, well-oiled machine, volleying arrows while inching forward behind a cloud of shields. They never broke formation. They were also the heavy hitters when it came to crushing rebellions. Darius's empire stretched from Egypt to the Indus Valley, and rebellions popped off all the time. The immortals were usually the first responders in Elam, Babylon, and Media. They weren't just punishment, they were a message the empire is watching. And the king's will never runs dry. Under Darius, they developed a darker rep, not only elite warriors, but tools of fear and brutal punishment. Even their iconic imagery got a serious upgrade. The carvings at Persepolis show them lined up perfectly straight, all stylish and identical, facing immortality carved in stone. This wasn't just a portrait, it was propaganda. Darius wanted every subject and visitor to know these guys are always here, always armed, and they don't die, break the law, and you face 1 or 10,000 of them through Darius. The immortals became more than a military unit. They became institutionalized fear, woven into royal imagery, deployed with surgical precision, and wrapped in silence stitched with golden thread. The Persian immortals hit legendary status under Xerxes the Great, and nowhere tested their rep harder than the tight mountain pass of Thermopylae in 480 BC. This battle, mythologized for centuries in art and film, wasn't just an army clash. It was an epic showdown between two totally different worlds, the imperial order of Persia versus the rebellious Greek city-states. And right in the eye of this storm were the immortals, when Xerxes invaded Greece with what ancient sources called the largest army ever seen. He brought the immortals as his personal vanguard. They weren't just bodyguards, they were the scalpel in the chaotic heart. Their reputation came ahead of them. The Greeks had heard tales of 10,000 undying warriors, elite troops serving their king like gods and fighting with flawless precision at Thermopylae. They met resistance that shook that legend. King Leonidas and a few thousand Greeks, most famously the 300 Spartan warriors, held the narrow path against wave after wave of Persian attacks. On day 2 of the battle, Xerxes ordered the immortals to break the Greek lines. This was supposed to be the knockout punch. After all, this was the cream of the crop. But what actually happened wasn't the quick win Xerxes expected. The immortals, no matter how skilled, were boxed in by the tight terrain. Their bows were almost useless in the cramped space, and their short spears couldn't reach past the longer dory spears of the Greek hoplites. For hours, they clashed with the disciplined Spartan warriors, fighting in tight formations, trained since childhood for exactly this kind of battle. The immortals took heavy losses. Herodotus, with maybe a hint of schadenfreude, noted they weren't any better than regular soldiers. This wasn't just a military fail, it was a slap to their image. The immortals were always seen as war gods in silk and armor, but at Thermopylae, they bled, they died, and for the first time. Their illusion of immortality cracked under Spartan spear tips and Greek defiance. Still, even in defeat, they were terrifying. They adapted, they regrouped, then they pushed forward again. Immortality doesn't mean unbeatable, it means endurance. The coolest thing about the Persian immortals wasn't just their training or tactics on the battlefield, it was their system. What really made them immortal wasn't magic or divine favor, it was management a cold, efficient, and relentless bureaucratic machine. When an immortal fell, whether in battle, from sickness, or retirement, someone else stepped in immediately. No mourning, no ceremony, just a seamless replacement. The total always stayed at $10,000. This wasn't poetic exaggeration, it was design. The Achaemenid Empire ran on logistics, and the immortals were the poster child. They had a whole crew of trainers and trainees always on standby, ready to fill any gap the moment it popped up. Replacements were kept at the capital, supervised, trained, and rotated through minor duties until called up. This internal structure made the immortals more than a fixed elite unit. They were a living system of excellence, constantly regenerating, constantly evolving. To pull this off, records were kept with extreme care. Officers called Hazaropates, literally commanders of 1,000, managed recruitment, discipline, and logistics. There were 10 commanders like this under the overall immortal leadership. Under them, a network of deputy commanders, clerks, and quartermasters made sure every soldier had weapons, food, housing, and medical support. Lose a guy in Egypt. The replacement shipped out immediately from Susa. Soldier breaks a leg on patrol in Media. The next one's already packing. This machine didn't just keep them battle ready, it was psychological. The illusion of 10,000 ever-changing soldiers was a terror tool for the Empire. Kill one, another instantly takes his place. Who they were didn't matter. Identity was irrelevant. Presence was eternal, like a many-headed dragon made of discipline and silk. The immortals created the illusion of an unstoppable force because their machine never paused for a pity party, even off the battlefield. This system worked like clockwork. If an immortal's family got disloyal or politically messy, He'd be quietly cut out and replaced. No scandals, no drama. The march went on like nothing happened. This cold, relentless mechanism, totally unlike the glory-hungry Greeks, was probably the immortals' greatest strength. Not skill, not courage, but the icy certainty that they never truly disappeared. Meanwhile, the Persian immortals were remembered as warriors. Sure, but way more than that, they were diplomats in armor. In the Achaemenid worldview, military power wasn't just about conquest, it was about presence, and immortals were often deployed not just to fight, but to be seen walking into foreign courts as living symbols of Persian elegance and power. Silk cloaks, gold-plated weapons, flawless discipline made them both terrifying in war and mesmerizing in peace. When an ambassador visited another land, immortals often tagged along not as bodyguards, but as eye candy. Picture a tiny elite escort rolling into a Greek city, or Babylon 10 perfectly synchronized guys. No rough leather or blood-stained bronze, just gold-trimmed silk, silent and mysterious beneath velvet caps. They don't shout or threaten. No need. Their very existence is a negotiation. In the satrapies' Persian provinces, the immortals were stationed to remind governors where the real power lived. They rarely meddled in civilian rule, but always watched, always present. A single whispered complaint could bring a squad to the governor's doorstep. Provincial rebellions usually fizzled before they even started, because facing the immortals was a horror story nobody wanted to star in, even inside the royal court. Their presence was versatile. They served as ceremonial guards at Nowruz festivals, coronations, and diplomatic receptions, but behind the scenes. They monitored courtiers, sniffed out traitors, and quietly enforced the king's will. Some historians say they were basically an internal intelligence agency, a living warning that loyalty wasn't optional. These dual identities, warrior and envoy, enforcer and ornament, were their genius. Unlike most ancient elite units living for battlefield glory, the immortals served a much bigger imperial game. War was just a tool. Their empire was held together not only by swords, but by symbols. The immortals knew fear and awe were twin sisters. At foreign courts and distant palaces, their arrival sent a crystal clear message: the king is watching. The empire was immortal. Resistance was just a waste of time. So they fought without ever drawing their swords. Every empire ages, and so do its legends. By the late Achaemenid period, the immortals were still respected, still scary, but no longer invincible. The machine that made them immortal started to rust, not with a bang, but a slow, creeping failure, as Persian kings drifted away from battlefields, drowning in luxury and court intrigue. The immortals slowly turned from tough warriors into royal decoration. Under kings like Artaxerxes, Xerxes, and Darius III, the elite troops still existed, still wore fancy clothes, still marched in line, but cracks showed. Recruitment standards dropped, political favors crept in, where once only the most disciplined and loyal were picked. Now nobles pulled strings to stuff their useless nephews into the sacred $10,000. The result: subtle but deadly uniforms without soul, discipline without heart. This rot became obvious when Alexander the Great attacked Persia in 334 BC, at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. The immortals guarded the Persian center to protect Darius III, though brave. They couldn't stand up to Alexander's brilliant tactics and ruthless Macedonian momentum. They got ambushed, outflanked, crushed. Worse, the legend died with them for centuries. The name immortal inspired fear, but Gaugamela proved they were no longer the force they'd been under Cyrus the Great or Xerxes. The instant replacement machine broke down. The backup system that once made their losses invisible was gone. That unit never fully recovered. When Alexander marched into Persepolis and took the royal palace, he stepped into an empty shell of an empire. The immortals weren't there to save it. Their undefeated streak finally snapped, but their story didn't end in defeat. Part of the immortals lived on. Alexander cleverly folded Persian tradition into his army. Later, during the Sasanian Empire, a new elite force rose up. Sometimes historians call them immortals too, not direct descendants, but still echoing the original legend, 10,000 strong. Elite, terrifying, immortal, even in collapse. The immortals left a blueprint. They showed the world how to build not just an army, but a legend. The Persian immortals may have disappeared from battlefields, but their influence didn't. Long after the Achaemenid Empire fell, the idea of an unbeatable elite haunted generals, kings, and storytellers alike. Their legend survived not because they won every fight, but because they stood for something way bigger, the flawless control of state power. An army that never ages, never questions orders, never flinches. When the Greeks talked about them, it was a mix of awe and pure suspicion. Herodotus called them the immortals, not 'cause they couldn't die, but because no one ever saw one drop dead. One falls, another steps in immediately, their presence eternal. To the Greeks, that was downright creepy, almost supernatural. They were used to war being chaotic and personal, the immortals precise and nameless, disciplined to the point of losing their humanity. Fast forward to Roman times. Scholars still gushed about the immortals when chatting ancient power. Even Byzantine historians admired the Persian elite troops' setup, and early Islamic historians spun tales of 10,000 warriors guarding ancient kings, their spears glittering like silver forests under the desert sun. This whole vibe got a reboot in the Sasanian Empire, with a slick cavalry unit, sometimes called the New Immortals. The Empire's iron fist, not direct descendants of the Achaemenids, but they carried the same job to be the Emperor's unbeatable symbol. Even Napoleon, centuries later, studied Persian military organization and praised their structure. In culture, the immortals seeped deep into legend. Modern media often turns them into monsters, masked assassins, or supernatural beasts. But the real story, way cooler. They were humans, scarily human. Ordinary folks turned into empire machines through brutal training, psychological control, and strict succession. No magic needed to become legends, just pure grit and silence. Their deadliest weapon wasn't a sword. It was the idea they'd always show up, an eternal shadow on the horizon. So the immortals live on in stone carvings, military doctrines, and the quiet dread of anyone who knows power. When perfectly organized and endlessly replaced, can nearly be immortal. Before the Greek warrior goddess legend, there were the Scythians, nomadic badasses of the Eurasian steppes, feared and respected from the Black Sea all the way to the Alai Mountains. Unlike most ancient societies, Scythian women didn't just sit weaving or babysitting. They rode horses, fired bows, and fought, not just tagging along, but leading, killing with killer skills. This wasn't a weird exception, it was their culture. Greek historians like Herodotus were gobsmacked meeting these ladies. He told of a tribe where women refused to marry unless they'd killed an enemy in battle. At first, It sounded like a tall tale, but archaeology backed it up. Earthen tombs called kurgans scattered across Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Russia revealed jaw-dropping finds young women's skeletons buried with bows, swords, and battle wounds. One showed a woman with an arrow stuck in her spine, clad in armor, buried with riches. These weren't ceremonial weapons they'd been used, and so had she. Scythian society was a total outlier compared to other civilizations of the time. Living on the steppe meant fast, relentless movement. Everyone had to ride, hunt, and defend the tribe, guys and gals alike. Girls learned archery as early as boys. They wore leather pants and armor just the same, hair, tattoos identical, making them indistinguishable while galloping through a hail of arrows. This shaped a warrior culture where gender roles on the battlefield were flexible but strictly enforced off it. A Scythian woman could be a horse-riding assassin 1 minute, then back home fulfilling ritual duties and motherhood the next. Those roles didn't clash. They balanced each other. Greek legends of Amazon warrior women, probably inspired by exaggerated meetings with Scythian women. But while Amazons lived only in myth, the Scythians were real. They fought Persia, tangled with Greece, and terrified the Macedonians. For centuries, they roamed the steppes with fire and fury, men and women alike, in the tiny West African kingdom of Dahomey, now Benin. An all-female army once struck terror into European colonists, so neighboring kingdoms, and anyone who underestimated them, known as the Agogi, or the Dahomey Amazons in French, nodding to the Greek myth. But these warriors were seriously real. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Agogi became the king's standing royal guard. But they weren't just guards, they were elite infantry, trained killers, protectors who never backed down. They might have started as elephant hunters or palace attendants, but they evolved into a feared military machine, selected from tough young women, often fierce or iron-willed. The Agogi were ripped from their families and thrown into brutal training camps. Discipline was absolute. They ran thorny obstacle courses, sparred with real swords, and swore off marriage, pledging total loyalty to the king. They braided their hair tight, carried muskets, machetes, and clubs, but their deadliest weapon, their mindset. 19th century European observers were stunned by their courage and brutality. One French officer described an Amazon Dahomey rushing forward, tearing a man's throat out, then casually wiping her sword. These weren't symbolic warriors. They were the frontline shock troops in raids, battles, and ambushes of the Franco-Dahomey Wars. In the 1890s, the Agogi went head-to-head with the French, outnumbered and outgunned. They still pulled off night raids, ambushes, and fought street by street to defend their kingdom. Their grit made French commanders rethink their war strategies and their sexist assumptions. But it's not just their battlefield rep that's impressive. The Dahomey Amazons thrived in a world that basically hated women. Carving out their own space and total influence, they advised the king, they ran the ceremonies, and they shaped the kingdom's foreign policy not just behind the scenes, but with blades in hand. Sure, the French eventually crushed Dahomey, but the Agogi legend never died. In fact, their legacy sparked modern warrior fantasies like Marvel's Black Panther's Dora Milaje. But truth is often wilder than fiction. Somewhere in Japan's dark medieval history rides a woman cutting through blood and myth, Tomo Gozen, a 12th century female samurai. She fought in the Genpei War, a brutal civil war between the Minamoto and Taira clans that birthed Japan's first shogunate. Tomoe wasn't some passive trophy wife or symbol. She was a commander, a deadly swordswoman and archer, trained in the fine art of slaughter. Famous for her pinpoint accuracy in battle, her story is best told in the Heike Monogatari, a war epic blending history with poetry. There, Tomoe is described as stunning white-skinned, long-haired, with a graceful face, but the next line, boom, she's also a killer sniper. And when she draws her sword, she's worth 1,000 men. Beautiful and deadly sounds like a contradiction. Nope, it's a package deal. Tomoe served under Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a warlord who might also have been her lover. During the campaign to control Kyoto, she wasn't some camp follower or battlefield nurse. She dove headfirst into the fight, commanded troops, and reportedly slit throats of many foes in one-on-one duels at the 1184 Battle of Iwazu, surrounded by enemy Minamoto forces. Yoshinaka ordered a last stand. Instead of running, Tomo chose to fight to the bitter end. In her most famous move, she reportedly jumped off her horse onto a charging cavalryman, knocked him down, and sliced off his head on the spot. Then she calmly rode back into the chaos, whether exaggerated or not. That moment has echoed for centuries as the ultimate symbol of her calm and unmatched skill. But what happened to Tomo after the war? That's still a mystery. Some say she was captured and forced into marriage. Others claim she became a nun, living quietly, and some believe she vanished like a ghost into legend's mist. Whatever the truth, Tomoe Gozen's legacy lives on in theater, legend, and national memory in a world ruled by rigid gender rules and inherited power. Tomo stood alone, sword drawn, head held high, utterly fearless. She didn't just fight for her lord, she fought for her right to exist where everyone said she shouldn't. Flash back to the 1st century AD, when the Roman Empire was at its peak, disciplined, organized, nearly unstoppable. Then along came Boudica, the fiery red-haired Celtic queen from Britannia, who nearly brought Rome to its knees. Her name echoes through history as a symbol of furious revenge, national pride, and the terrifying power of a woman with nothing left to lose. Boudica was married to Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what's now eastern England. He was a client king under Roman rule, a puppet allowed to keep his land as long as he stayed peaceful. But when Prasutagus died, Rome ignored his will and brazenly seized their land. In the process, Roman officials publicly beat Boudica and, according to Tacitus, even raped her daughters. That was their brutal way to crush rebellion. Instead, it lit a wildfire. In 60 or 61 AD, Boudica united British tribes and launched one of the fiercest uprisings in Roman history. And she wasn't just a figurehead. Roman historians describe her leading troops in a chariot, wielding a spear, wearing flowing robes, and rocking a huge gold necklace. Her flaming red hair whipped behind her as she rode, rallying the people to fight. She was priestess, general, and walking wrath all in one. Her army stormed Camulodunum, modern Colchester, burning the city to the ground. Next up was Londinium, the birthplace of modern London, where she slaughtered Romans and razed the city. Historians estimate over 70,000 Romans and allies were killed in just a few months. Her forces left behind a trail of ashes and broken Roman pride. But the Romans, under Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, regrouped, though outnumbered. They lured Boudica into a decisive battle where Roman discipline and formation tactics won out. The rebellion was crushed, facing defeat. Boudica reportedly took poison rather than be captured, even in defeat. Boudica's legacy only grew. Roman historians called her savage, but couldn't deny her courage and leadership to the English, especially in later centuries. She became a symbol of resistance against foreign oppressors and homegrown tyranny alike. Meanwhile, on the war-torn grasslands of Central Asia during the Mongol Empire's Golden Age, a woman emerged who terrified warriors and shamed princes not with a sword, but sheer physical might. Her name was Kudalun, the great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan himself. But she didn't just live in his shadow, she built her own legend, one chokehold at a time. Born around 1260 AD, Kudalun was the daughter of Kaidu Khan, a powerful cousin of Kublai Khan and a contender for the Mongol Empire throne. She was raised like a warrior prince, learning archery, horse riding, and battlefield tactics. But what really made her stand out was her wrestling skills, a sport fiercely respected among Mongol elites. According to Persian historian Rashid al-Din, Kudalun vowed only to marry a man who could beat her in wrestling. Plenty tried, all failed. Dozens of suitors left with bruised egos and empty hands, as some even bet horses, gold, and livestock. Rumor has it, she lined up 10,000 horses from her wins, making her not just a champ, but one of the richest women on the steppe. But she wasn't wrestling men just for kicks. She fought alongside her father in real battles, leading troops and breaking enemy lines in campaigns against rival Mongol factions and Chinese armies. Kudalun was Kaidu's most trusted military advisor. He even planned to name her his heir, a move unheard of in a male-dominated culture ruled by warlords. Naturally, this sparked outrage. Some Mongol nobles whispered that her influence was unnatural, her power downright scary. In the end, Kaidu picked a male relative as successor, but her legend lived on. Even Marco Polo, who traveled the Mongol Empire, wrote about a Mongol princess who fought like a tiger and could ride and shoot bows as well as any man. Later, history tried to romanticize or downplay her, turning her into a love-struck figure or a mere myth. But don't get it twisted, Kudalun was real, and her power was legendary. She proved that even in an empire run by men, a woman could rise not because she was allowed, but because no one could stop her. And remember, this was a time when women couldn't vote, own land freely, or even wear men's clothes without getting arrested. So here comes a teenage French peasant girl, not only wearing armor, but commanding an army. Joan of Arc, born before 1412 in a small village called Domremy, was an illiterate farm girl, but by 17 she was leading troops, facing kings, and reshaping the 100 Years' War between France and England. Her rise didn't come from military training or noble blood. Joan claimed divine inspiration. She said she heard voices saints like Michael, Catherine, and Margaret telling her she was chosen to kick the English out of France and crown Charles, the Dauphin, king. Sounds crazy, right? She should have been locked up as a madwoman, but instead, she got to meet the future King Charles VII. The court put her to the test. Clerics grilled her for a week straight, but somehow, she passed. They saw something in her steadfastness, charisma, something unexplainable, so clad in white armor with banners flying. Joan was sent to Orleans, a besieged city and the war's turning point. French generals were skeptical, but just her presence revived their spirits. Joan didn't just watch from the sidelines. She led assaults, braved arrows, and rallied troops under fire against all odds. The French broke the siege and won. That victory sparked a national frenzy. Joan became known as the Maid of Orleans, a symbol of divine favor and patriotism after a string of wins. She escorted Charles to Reims for his coronation, just like the voices predicted, but power, fame, and miracles always attract enemies. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians, English allies, tried in an English-backed church court. Joan was convicted of heresy, witchcraft, and famously, wearing men's clothes, a crime punishable by death. She was just 19 when burned alive in Rouen market square. But death only made her legend burn brighter. Years later, the church overturned her conviction. Centuries later, she was canonized. Fast forward to Nakano Takeko grabbing a naginata, a curved blade polearm loved by female samurai. Japan was changing fast. It was the late 1860s, and the samurai class was being dismantled as the country modernized, but in one last stand defending tradition. This young woman etched her name as the final Onabugeisha female warrior in samurai history. Nakano was born in 1847 into a prestigious family of scholars and warriors from a young age. She studied Confucian classics, calligraphy, and most importantly, martial arts. Her weapon of choice, the naginata, wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol, usually wielded by samurai women. It allowed long-range attacks and graceful, fluid fighting styles. Under the guidance of her foster father and martial arts master, she trained until her skills rivaled the best men in the region. By her 20s, Nakano was both a teacher and a warrior. Instructing, other women picked up sword skills too, but in 1868, when the Boshin War kicked off a civil war between the royalists and the old Tokugawa shogunate, Nakano wasn't about to sit on her hands. She joined the defense of Aizu, one of the last strongholds of traditional samurai resistance. Women weren't officially allowed to fight, but Nakano formed an unofficial female warrior unit called the Joshitai, or Women's Army, wearing hakama and traditional armor. These ladies fought fiercely alongside the men, defending their families, city, and way of life at the Battle of Aizu. Nakano led her squad in hand-to-hand combat against royal troops armed with rifles. Witnesses say she took down a few enemies before getting shot in the chest, knowing death was near and refusing to be captured or humiliated. She asked her sister to behead her. Her body was buried at a shrine in Fukushima, sword by her side. Nakano's bravery became legendary, even if the battle was lost. Today, her statue still stands in Japan, especially in Aizu, where she's remembered not just as a warrior, but as a woman who refused to bow to modernization, patriarchy, or death. Amid the fiery ruins of World War II, there was one name that made German soldiers on the Eastern Front shudder: Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Nicknamed Lady Death by her enemies, she wasn't a myth, a morale booster, or propaganda fodder. She was the real deal, a Soviet sniper with 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers. She's recorded as the deadliest female sniper in history, born in 1916 in what's now Ukraine. Pavlichenko was a fierce competitor from a young age, fiercely patriotic, and blessed with sniper instincts. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, she was just 24 and studying history at university. But instead of burying her nose in books, she grabbed a rifle and volunteered for the Red Army. Officials initially tried to push her into nursing. She flat out refused. She wanted to fight, and fight she did. Sent to the front lines during the sieges of Odessa and Sevastopol, Pavlichenko earned her reputation the hard way, sitting still for hours, camouflaged in bone-chilling cold, waiting for that perfect shot. Her targets weren't just infantry. She hunted officers, machine gunners, and rival snipers. She operated with nerves of steel, near supernatural patience, and a burning hatred for the invaders. Her kill count got so high she was pulled off the front lines and sent on a diplomatic tour across the US, Canada, and Britain. There, she met President Franklin D. Roosevelt and befriended Eleanor Roosevelt, who admired her calm and smarts. Pavlichenko called on the Allies to open a second front in Europe and mocked reporters who asked her about makeup and skirt lengths. After the war, she didn't fade quietly into the background. She earned a university degree, became a historian, and trained the next generation of Soviet snipers, despite war injuries. Her legacy lives on. She was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal and hailed as a national hero in both Russia and Ukraine. In a world that often doubts women's roles in war, Lyudmila Pavlichenko didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just did it better than almost anyone else who ever lived. For every famous name, Tomoe Gozan, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, there are countless others erased by mainstream history. History, after all, has mostly been written by men, and when women picked up swords, guns, or spears, they were often erased, diminished, or turned into legends. But make no mistake, female warriors were always there, across continents and centuries, and their silence wasn't voluntary. Think of the Trung sisters, Trung Trak and Trung Nhi from Vietnam. They led a rebellion against China in the 1st century AD. They rode elephants into battle, rallied thousands, and ruled an independent kingdom for 3 years before being crushed by the stronger Chinese forces. Their resistance is still honored in temples and festivals, even if global history books barely mention them, or Ya Asantewa of the Ashanti Empire in West Africa, who in 1900s led a revolt against British colonialists as Queen Mother. She rallied her people when the British demanded the sacred golden stool, the symbol of Ashanti sovereignty. She gave powerful speeches and led troops into battle, proving leadership and defiance don't care about gender. There were Viking female warriors too, maybe not as many as the legends say, but definitely real. Archaeologists have found women buried with weapons, armor, even war horses, not as decoration, but as actual fighters. Apache women in the American Southwest fought as well, like Lozan, a spiritual warrior who rode and fought alongside her brother, the famous leader Victorio. Every era, every land, female warriors fought not always to conquer, but to protect their families, culture, and homes. Some led armies, some fought solo in resistance movements, queens and peasants alike, but all shattered the lie that war's only a man's game. Today, their legacy is being restored, from academic research to popular culture. Their stories are finally coming to light, and every rediscovered name reminds us history isn't just what's written, it's also what's been erased. These women didn't ask to be remembered, they just wanted respect, and the world is finally starting to listen. In ancient Mesopotamia, yeah, that's modern-day Iraq music, wasn't just background noise. It was a ritual, power, and a whole language on its own. And no instrument screamed that louder than the lyre, one of the world's first stringed instruments. The Mesopotamian lyre has been around for over 4,500 years, starting in the Sumerian city of Ur, where music was glued to temple rituals and royal life. These Ur lyres weren't your average wooden harps. They were fancy masterpieces, decked out with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and super detailed animal motifs. One famous example is the bull-headed lyre found in a royal tomb back in the 1920s by Sir Leonard Woolley. The soundbox looked like a bull's body. The head was covered in gold leaf, and the beard was made of lapis lazuli. But don't think it was just for show. The bull symbolized power, and having it on the lyre probably had some serious spiritual meaning beyond just looking cool, played with fingers or a tiny pick. This lyre gave off haunting, echoing sounds. We can't hear the exact ancient tunes anymore, but scholars believe the Sumerians used a 7-note scale, pretty much like Western music today. Clay tablets with early musical notation give us juicy clues, showing that music theory and scale building were already a thing back then. These lyres weren't just museum pieces that locked away in palace halls, in temples. Music came with offerings and prayers to the gods. Hymns were sung with lyre accompaniment to honor deities like Inanna and Enlil, turning music into a sacred bridge between humans and gods. In literature, the lyre was even used to mourn the dead, helping souls cross into the afterlife. So yeah, the lyre wasn't just an instrument, it was the voice of transformation and magic. Mesopotamian musicians got mad respect. Some were priestesses, others performed in royal courts. They memorized complex songs passed down orally, often learning from childhood in special schools for scribes and musicians. Today, replicas of these ancient lyres still get played in museums and reenactments. Their gentle strings, reminding us that long before Mozart, medieval minstrels, or even Homer's epics, humans were plucking strings in the desert, chasing beauty and sound. While the lyre sang sweetly for the gods, the aulos screamed, wailed, and danced inside ancient Greek hearts. This double-piped reed instrument wasn't your gentle flute. It was wild, emotional, and totally unforgiving. For the Greeks, music wasn't just fun and games. It was ethos, a force that shaped the soul. And the aulos was the wild child of that idea, unlike the lyre, which symbolized harmony and order and was favored by Apollo. The aulos was Dionysus's jam, the god of wine, pleasure, and madness. It popped up in rituals, theater performances, and military parades, bringing all kinds of emotional flavor and purpose. It had 2 pipes, usually made of wood, bone, or ivory, this each with its own reed and finger holes. The player, called an aulate, blew into both pipes at once, creating a thick, piercing sound more like bagpipes than a modern flute. This took insane breath control. Players often used circular breathing in through the nose while blowing out through the cheeks to keep the music flowing non-stop. This effort puffed up their cheeks so much that athletes sometimes teased the aulates for looking ridiculous. But despite the mockery, these musicians were respected, even worshipped in some circles. The aulos wasn't background music. It stirred the blood in ancient Greek drama. It followed tragedies and comedies, adding emotion and rhythm to Sophocles and Euripides' plays. On the battlefield, it kept the hoplites in step, its piercing calls cutting through chaos. And in Bacchic rituals, it pushed dancers into trance states, blurring the line between performer and possessed. Plato had a complicated relationship with the aulos in the Republic. He famously dissed it for being too emotional, preferring instruments like the lyre and kithara for their intellectual clarity, but even he couldn't deny its power. The aulos could mimic sadness, rage, or excitement sometimes all in one breath. Today, fragments of ancient alloy survive in museums, and modern reconstructions hint at its raw energy. Unlike the mathematically balanced lyre, the aulos wasn't about perfection, it was about release. It carried the sounds of frenzy, mourning, seduction, and war in ancient Chinese courts and scholar studies. Music wasn't just art, it was moving philosophy, and few instruments embody the better than the guqin and guzheng, two types of zithers carrying the sounds of dynasties. Meditation and poetic reflection, at first glance, they look pretty similar, but each carved out its own role in shaping Chinese musical identity. The guqin is the older of the two, rocking a history over 3,000 years, with 7 strings and a long wooden body with no frets. It produces gentle, subtle, to untrained ears. The guqin sounds like a whisper sliding notes, harmonics, strings plucked like raindrops on old tiles. But to Chinese scholars and sages, these sounds reflect the balance between heaven and earth. Confucius himself supposedly played the guqin, believing it sharpened virtue and inner harmony in ancient China. Learning the guqin wasn't about showmanship, it was about becoming civilized. Compare that to the guzheng. It's louder, younger, flashier sibling with a more public vibe, with anywhere from 16 to 21 strings, or in modern versions. The guqin is designed for performance. Its curved wooden frame and movable bridges let players whip up rich melodies and dramatic string slides. Musicians pluck the strings with plectra attached to their fingers, creating sparkling note sequences like flowing water. It's favored in palaces, folk music, and even military camps. If the guqin is the soul's whisper, the guzheng is the crowd's song. Both play roles in rituals and storytelling. The guqin often pairs with poetry reading, philosophy lectures, and meditation, while the guzheng stars at parties, operas, and epic historical retellings. Its music can mimic galloping horses, flowing rivers, or lovers' sobs, all through vibrating strings and nimble fingers. These instruments also represented gender roles in ancient China. Guqin was traditionally played by male scholars, while the guzheng was linked to female musicians, especially in later dynasties. Still, both were respected, taught in music academies, and formed part of Confucius's balanced education ideal. Today, guqin and guzheng still get played, making a comeback in both classical and modern styles. They're vibrant echoes of ancient Chinese souls, where music wasn't just noise but a path to virtue and emotional depth. In ancient Egypt, music wasn't just background noise. It was sacred, a divine tool echoing through temples, tombs, and daily life. From pharaohs to peasants, music was everywhere. It comforted workers, honored the dead, guided rituals, and entertained the living. And the instruments that created this soundscape were as diverse as the Nile itself. One of the oldest and most iconic Egyptian instruments was the harp. Early harps, shaped like bows, evolved into large angular ones as tall as a person. These were plucked with fingers, usually by temple musicians or court artists. Harps weren't just for art, they connected to the afterlife. Tomb paintings often show harpists playing for the dead souls, helping their journey into eternity. Then there's the sistrum, a sacred rattle linked to the goddess Hathor, protector of music, motherhood, and joy, made of metal with loose crossbars. The sistrum rattled with a jangling clatter, not subtle, but powerful, used in temples to call gods, purify spaces, and ward off evil. The sistrum's shake was believed to please deities and keep cosmic order intact. Flutes, often made from reeds or bones, added breathy tunes to processions and rituals. Double pipes, blowing through two tubes at once, created rich, droning harmonies the ancestors of the Greek aulos. Percussion included frame drums, hand clappers, even castanets, especially in dance and festivals. Professional musicians in Egypt held respected roles. Many were women, depicted in art as harpists and singers, often serving temples. These women weren't just performers, they were singers of Amun, musicians of Isis, spiritual powerhouses. Music could honor gods, accompany offerings, and mark transitions between life and death. Egyptian musical notation remains a mystery. Unlike Mesopotamia or Greece, few musical records survive, but their instruments, vividly shown in tombs and temples, tell plenty. Ancient Egyptians saw music as structure, emotion, and magic, even in death. Music was essential. Instruments were buried with the elite, owners believing they'd play again in the field of reeds, Egypt's version of heaven for them. Music was no mere entertainment. It was the language of eternity, long before writing carved history in stone. Ancient African cultures used something rawer and more direct rhythm across the continent. Drums weren't just instruments, they were voices. They spoke and commanded, remembered and summoned in ancient African societies. Music, especially percussion, was a living, breathing language carrying stories, laws, identities, and the heartbeat of the divine. Drum types varied by region and purpose, but one of the most iconic was the talking drum of West Africa, hourglass-shaped with tightened leather cords. This drum could mimic the tonal language of its people. Skilled drummers could speak full sentences by adjusting tension while striking with curved sticks. Messages traveled across villages, announcing births, deaths, warnings, or royal summons, way before paper or post offices. Drums became the continent's first wireless communication system, but drums weren't just practical, they were spiritual too. In ancient kingdoms like Kush and Nubia, drums summoned ancestors and gods. In If and Benin, they honored kings and deities in fancy royal ceremonies. Drumming was the heart of initiations, healing rituals, and funerals. People said sacred drumming woke forces lurking beyond the invisible fog. African drums come in all shapes: djembe, dunun, bugarabu, and kedi, each playing its own role in the musical system, carved from a single log, carefully, hollowed out and wrapped in animal hide, each tuned to a unique note or tone. This craftsmanship was sacred, passed down from father to son, complete with rituals for making the instrument. And drumming wasn't the whole story. Bells, rattles, shakers, and finger harps added layers of rhythm and melody, weaving a complex polyrhythmic soundscape that Western music took centuries to even get a hint of. In African tradition, music can't be separated from movement. You don't just listen, you have to dance, breathe, and sweat to it. The drummer isn't just a performer, he's a conduit, channeling energy, soul, and community memory. These rhythms spread via Sahara trade routes, down the Nile, and later through the Atlantic slave trade, shaping the music of migrant communities from Brazil to the Caribbean. But its heart always beats in Africa, where rhythm isn't entertainment, it's identity, ancestry, and survival up in the Andean highlands, where the air is thin and clouds hug the ground. Music floats over stone cities and terraced fields not from strings or drums, but from the wind. Ancient Andean civilizations, like Nazca, Moche, and Inca developed rich musical traditions centered on wind instruments, flutes, whistles, and most famously, panpipes called siku. Siku may look simple, but are surprisingly complex bunches of bamboo or reed pipes of different lengths tied together in rows or 2 rows. Each pipe plays one note, and the player quickly switches between rows to make melodies. The result, a haunting harmony that sounds like a chat with the wind itself. Siku ensembles often play in pairs, 2 players trading notes in a hocketing style, symbolizing duality and balance in Andean nature and society. Flutes made from bone, clay, or reed are also common, some tiny enough to wear like a necklace, others large enough to blast deep, echoing bass notes. Many instruments are carved with birds, snakes, or spirits, showing the spiritual bond between sound and nature. They're not just instruments, they're sacred tools. Music was used to call rain, bless crops, honor the sun, or communicate with ancestors. A fun fact: Moche clay whistle vessels pour water in, and air chambers push air through the whistle, making eerie sounds basically. Pottery that plays music, probably used in rituals combining water, air, and sound into one sacred act. In Inca society, music marked every life stage from birthdays to funerals, military parades to farming festivals, each with its own tune. Inca musicians played for gods like Inti, the sun, and Pachamama, Mother Earth, offering breath as a form of worship. Even soldiers marched to coordinated flute tunes, turning war into a ritual dance. Though Spanish colonizers nearly wiped out many native traditions, Andean flute music never fully vanished. Today, you can still hear those echoes in Peru's highlands and Bolivian villages, the ancient voices of stone, wind, and sky humming through the thin air. In ancient India, music wasn't just performance, it was cosmic technology. According to Hindu philosophy, the universe was created from sound, from a primal vibration called Om. From this belief grew one of the world's most refined and enduring musical traditions, built on ritual, math, and spiritual transformation. Ancient texts like the Vedas, dating back at least to 1500 BCE, contained hymns called saman, chants meant to be sung, not just memorized. These hymns were part of sacred rituals with specific melodies designed to align the soul with divine forces. The priestly caste, the Brahmins, trained not only in philosophy and fire rituals, but also in voice control and musical rhythm. Precision was mandatory. Missing a note could, theoretically, ruin the whole ceremony. Early instruments in Vedic and post-Vedic India served both sound and symbolism. The veena, a plucked string instrument with a resonating gourd, became a symbol of knowledge and divine expression. It's always been linked to Saraswati, goddess of wisdom and arts. Its strings are said to vibrate with the universe's rhythm, helping players connect with cosmic truths through melody. Wind instruments, like the bansuri, a bamboo flute, were more than melody makers, they carried legends. Krishna, the god of love and divine play, is often shown playing the flute, charming humans and beasts alike. The bansuri's sound was believed to pierce the illusion of reality. Maya, lifting listeners to a higher state, consciousness. Folks, percussion instruments pack some serious punch. Mridangam and tabla don't just keep the beat, they mimic heartbeats, breathing, even cosmic cycles. These rhythms, called talas, are complex math patterns, some cyclical, some totally off kilter, each tied to emotions and times of day. Indian music is glued to rasa theory, the idea that music should stir up specific emotional flavors, like love, heroism, peace, or sadness, since ancient times. Raga's musical frameworks were crafted to wake the soul and guide meditation. Unlike many ancient traditions that faded away, Indian music didn't just survive, it evolved. But at its core, the old belief that playing music is touching the divine. Over in ancient Mesoamerica, from Teotihuacan's sky-high pyramids to Maya and Aztec ritual plazas, music was inseparable from the sacred. It wasn't just art, it was power talking to gods, blood magic, summoning rain, and scaring the heck out of enemies. For Mesoamericans, music was ritual tech, an invisible thread linking humans to gods and the dead. Drums ruled the soundscape. The star, the Huehuetl, a tall, single drum carved from hollow tree trunks, played bare-handed, covered in animal hide, and decorated with sacred carvings or images. The Huehuetl boomed at festivals, wars, and sacrifices. Its deep, resonant beats echoed like the god's own heartbeat through stone courtyards. Then there's the teponaztli, a slit drum made from hollow wood, played with rubber-headed mallets, its drumhead carved into two tongues, producing high and low tones when struck. But the teponaztli wasn't just a drum, it could talk. In Nahuatl, the Aztec language, folks said it could sing the names of gods or the rhythms of fate. Wind instruments mattered too. Flutes made from bone, clay, and reeds were popular, often shaped like animals or deities. Some were so finely crafted they mimicked bird calls, jaguar growls, or even human screams. The Aztecs even had a famous death whistle shaped like a skull that shrieked eerily, used in war or sacrifice rituals to terrify enemies or open gates to the spirit world. Music accompanied every major event: birth, coming of age, war, farming cycles, and death. Musicians and dancers trained in special schools, performing not just for crowds but for gods. Some instruments were reserved for nobles or priests. Play the wrong note, and you risked spiritual offense. Even the Aztecs' central sacrifice rituals followed a score. Drums thumped, flutes wailed, and conch shells blasted as hearts were offered to the sun. Music wasn't gentle, it activated. It guided souls, fed gods, and kept the cosmic wheel spinning. In Mesoamerica, music wasn't background noise. It was the ritual. Not entertainment, it was transformation. Though these ancient civilizations rose and fell, their music never truly died. It survives, not always as sound, but as ritual, design, and cultural DNA in many ways. Ancient music isn't about sheet music or recordings. It's passed hand to hand, mouth to ear, heart to heart, a living tradition encoded in memory and performance. Take the Chinese guqin or Indian veena. These aren't dusty museum pieces. They're still played today, often with techniques passed down thousands of years. Performers don't just imitate ancient sounds, they embody them. Every note carries centuries of philosophy, culture, and meditation. One strum, and you can feel the longing or joy once experienced by emperors or sages. Over in Africa, drums still speak, the rhythms of the djembe, call and response of the goje. The accents in dance all echo ancient practices predating colonial maps and written history. Even in the Americas, the haunting breath of the Andes siku, or the thunderous powwow drums of native tribes, reflect ancestral echoes. Some instruments are direct descendants, others inspired recreations. But their roots are ancient. Even in modern Western music, old ideas survive. The 7-note heptatonic scale from Mesopotamia laid the groundwork for modern harmony. Greek music theory modes, intervals, ethos influenced early Christian chants and classical music's birth. Along with its instruments, the lyre morphed into the lute, which begat the guitar. The double reed design of the aulos inspired the oboe and bassoon. But maybe the most enduring legacy is ancient music's purpose. It wasn't about selling tickets or topping charts. It was ritual, healing, marking life, death, planting, harvesting, love, and war. It had meaning. Even today, music remains a universal language, stirring emotions without a single word, building communities with no walls. In a digital world drowning in noise, ancient music reminds us sound can be sacred, rhythm is memory, and melody bridges worlds, whether whispered by an old gukin, roaring through war drums, or blown from clay pipes. Our ancestors' songs still echo. We just have to bother to listen.